Welcome to the first Independent Media Alliance panel. So today we're going to be sort of the inaugural first panel that we're going to be doing for the Independent Media Alliance with a lot of the first people to join, and ultimately we're going to be discussing the idea of the false binary. And I think what's important to note out of the gate is that this is the first of many projects that you're going to be seeing coming, many different topics around the two-party illusion, the technocracy, all sorts of different things we're going to be discussing. And I think what we want to start off, just to kind of let out, is the press release that we put out earlier. And I want to make sure we read that to start, so you guys know kind of the general direction of the Independent Media Alliance. Now, we plan on putting out Whitney, Derrick, and myself putting out an opening panel discussion, sort of just to kind of put out the opening ideas. And we were going to do that originally, but we ended up for time having to put it off. So I wanted to read off the opening release that we put out with the Alliance before I bring everybody in to kind of have our discussion around the false binary, or as we call it, the two-party illusion. So the idea is our emphasis will be on countering narratives currently being seeded within the alternative media space, including, but not limited to, the false two-party paradigm, hopium and politicians, support for imperial wars, fifth-generation warfare, and technocratic solutions to legitimate problems, digital IDs pitched as the only solution for immigration, voting fraud, prevention, all sorts of different things we've discussed. Now, the IMA will take several actions in the pursuit of this goal, including regular panels like you're going to see today, more of a round table as it were, and debates featuring Alliance members and guests. And the point there is that we're planning on bringing in more people as well. And soon enough, we're going to be highlighting some smaller channels that will ultimately be the point being people that were consistent on main topics that we've discussed. Now, the IMA will also be partnering with decentralized video platform Odyssey to ensure that the content cannot be easily censored. And we're talking about essentially the first decentralized media network. Now, today, our focus will be on the false binary. Now, what I put out earlier is that we're going to be discussing the false binary, as I call it, the two-party illusion. Now, one of the important points to discuss today is how this is not a manipulation that is unique to the United States, but one that is used by power structures all around the world to coerce their respective populations, typically into very specific political choices that benefit the ruling class, and almost always at the expense of the people themselves. Now, this concept is, however, much larger than just politicians and political choices, as it can be used to create the illusion of choice in just about any context, which I think is an important thing we'll discuss today, giving the false impression of objectivity when in reality, both prearranged choices, or in many parts of the world, more than two choices, but the same dynamic, are not the full scope of possible options, and were chosen because either choice will take you in the direction desired by the manipulation's architects. Now, today we'll break down the idea around this, discuss how it affects your life and livelihood, and what actions we can take to solve this problem. So let me bring in everybody else to the conversation, and I'll throw it to Derrick for some more points to include. Go ahead, Derrick.
Yeah, thanks Ryan for the intro, and just thank you to everybody who's been supportive. As Ryan said, we just put out this press release a couple days ago. If anybody wants to actually read it, if you haven't seen it, you can find it at thelastamericanvagabond.com and at theconsciousresistance.com. It's just titled Announcing the Independent Media Alliance. And you can see a list of the other folks who are currently involved. As Ryan mentioned, we have sent out some initial invites, and everybody here who is present for this panel is part of that initial group, and this group will probably grow with time. And our main focus is doing panels like this on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, potentially doing debates, doing collaborative investigations. As Ryan also mentioned, there are some discussions around partnering with Odyssey, launching a website, and really just creating a new place that you, the listener and the viewer out there who might notice some of the crazy things that we're seeing, can actually go to as a trustworthy place to get your content. And, that doesn't mean, and I think everybody here will agree, that we're all not going to have the same opinions on every single topic. That's not what we're after. We're not after trying to say, think this one way, and that's the only way. But we all seem to be seeing some of the same problems and issues within the larger alternative independent media space, and decided it's time to come together to try to be a counter to that narrative. And if you know what we're talking about, you may have heard the term mainstream alternative media, things like that. That's what we're trying to counter. That's the narratives we're trying to push back against. So this is just one of many panels to come. And yeah, I'm excited about it. So maybe, Ryan, we should just do a brief round of intros, like super brief, just everybody go around, say their name and what outlet they represent, and then we can open up, get into it.
Absolutely. Well, you guys, I'm sure you're familiar with Derrick and myself, but Ryan, Cristian, Last American Vagabond. Go ahead, Steve. We'll go around the top.
Yeah, hi, I'm Steve Poikinen, and you can find everything that I do at amwakeupshow.com, including all of the other projects that I'm involved with. And I'm very, very stoked to be a part of this thing.
I'm Hervé Moric, down here in Mexico, geopoliticsandempire.com. Formerly TNT Radio. Unfortunately, this weekend, TNT Radio is closing for good, so it was a good run. So, yeah.
I'm Ian Davis. I primarily write at iandavis.com. I'm based in the UK on the south coast, and I also write for a few other outlets, including Unlimited, Hangout, and very fortunate to write for Hervoy's Geopolitics and Empire, and also Kit's Off Guardian, which republishes a lot of my work.
And I'm Kit Knightley. Everything I do is at off-guardian.org. I'm the editor there.
Awesome.
And Derrick, you didn't
Yeah,
say it, but
for those who don't know my work is at theconsciousresistance.com. Also, I'm a writer with thelastAmericanVagabond.com. And really excited for this. This is called Debunking the False Binary, right? So maybe, I know that, Ryan, we had some sort of prompts that we could start with, because each of us might interpret that differently. And as you said, Ryan, this isn't just about, it's not only about the U.S. politics and U.S. election. Obviously, for those of us based in North America, it's coming up. It's less than 45 days, so that's an important event. But the UK just had elections, and I know the same problem exists in countries around the world. So really, we're trying to tackle this subject, and again, give you guys out there in the audience some more talking points, potentially some more things to consider in terms of the dialogue that's out there, that's basically trying to tell you, continue to vote for lesser of evils, or continue to support this person over this person because they're slightly better. And we want to be able to push back against that.
Yeah, I think I definitely chose to use an image that I've used before that is specific to the United States, duopoly. But I think, again, that's what's really important. I feel like that is really, it resonates with a lot of people in the United States. Conversation, of course, for whatever reason is prominent in the world. But it's important to recognize that this is a bigger issue than just the United States, or even just, as I was saying in the opening, just politics. It's something that is used to manipulate the illusion of choice around any number of things. And so let's go around to start today. We can start with Ian and go around and give us your thoughts on, really just what is the false binary to you?
Thanks, Ryan. I think it's interesting to look at some work that was done by what used to be called the Nudge Unit in the UK, which is now has been farmed out as now a private enterprise. And it wrote a document in, I think it was 2010, called Mindspace. And in that document, it said that the purpose of behavioral insights, and that it's now called the Behavioral Insights Team, was to move people from decision makers who would make decisions based upon information and information that they were given, to what it called automated decision makers, whose choices would be determined by what it called their choice environment. So the idea is that you would create this choice environment that would ultimately, the only choice that people could make was one of two choices that would be what the architects of that choice environment wanted in the first place. So it's the creation of the illusion of choice to bring people to a point where the intended destination was predetermined, and that's very much. We saw that very much during COVID. The Behavioral Insights Team, the UK government had a SPI-B, which was the Behavioral Insights Unit that was used during the COVID pandemic in the UK, and they were very much designing people's choice environment. So your choice was submit to, the rollout of biometric ID, or submit to vaccination, or lose your job. That kind of choice is created, and it's not a choice. It's designed to control people.
Derrick, you want to jump in next?
Yeah, I remember reading about the whole Nudge Unit thing. I'm not as familiar with it as Ian is, but I think that is a great example of the forces that are at play, right? I think in the broader truth community, freedom community, conspiracy community, whatever you want to call it, online, there is a tendency to constantly question and guess everything, which is, I think, important. Question everything is part of your mantra, Ryan. And even, when it comes to what we're doing here, right? Some people are already suspecting that we're a part of something deeper. So there's this paranoid somewhat mindset that does exist, but I think it's actually based in a reality, like the sort of things that Ian is discussing there, that nudging people and trying to get to a preordained destination and path that they already want for us to go down. And there are a lot of people who are concerned about that. And so then they end up being extra paranoid about everything going on in the world, whether it's us, whether it's this thing or that thing. And then maybe just throwing their hands up and saying, like, I don't know what to make of any of it, right? And it can get to a place where I think apathy and confusion can take over. I also think that's by design. You can look at the leaked GCHQ documents that came through Snowden and others after that, showing that they purposely create fake online media accounts and that their goal is to delay, disrupt, divide, all those sorts of things, whether it's activist groups or just individuals. So there are real things we need to contend with that exist and that we're not maybe privy to every day. This is also part of the whole 5th generation warfare that we've talked about on a previous panel. And so it's important for people to use their critical thinking, but I also think the danger here, and this is, I guess, the concern is, the idea that you can't tell truth from lies. And so somebody learns about the nudge unit, or they learn about the GCHQ, or they learn about the NSA, and then they end up completely paranoid and feeling like they can't trust anyone or anything, let alone their own thoughts. And that's a really dangerous place to be. I think all of that's by design.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of this a little bit, when Ian brings up the nudge unit, what immediately pops into my head is the Cass Sunstein and Richard Thaler book Nudge, which came out in 2009 on the tail of the cognitive infiltration document, where all of this stuff is sort of cataloged through the lens of the national security state. And so, yeah, on one level, yes, it is okay to be perfectly paranoid of what's going on around you and the various different methods of taking over not just, various segments of the internet or culture, but also your thought processes. And that there are the methods by which they're dispersed are designed to lead people into that black-pilled space, where it's ultimately you seeding the vast majority of your energy and then falling into a place of stasis. And I think that's one of the most important things that we have to combat. And that's one of the things that the mainstream alternative media is designed to do, is to drive people into that space of stasis so that they become either malleable or disengage entirely, which means that they're no longer a part of any solution anywhere for any reason. And you just lock yourself into your house and become, I what Julian Assange warned about, which is a victim of the filterverse of one.
Well said. Kit, you want to go next?
Yeah. I suppose we want to talk about definitions and evolutions. And as you pointed out, like the idea of the false binary or the fig dichotomy, or it's been given a ton of names, but they all mean roughly the same thing: the illusion of choice. And that's not a new idea, and it's not an American idea, as you said. Party politics basically reduced into that the moment it was invented, and it's been an ever-present, across democracies for, you could argue, 150 years or more. I think what we're seeing recently, and I think this is why it's an important thing to talk about at the moment, is an evolution of that idea and an expansion of that idea. We see it spread across the world to geopolitics, which you could argue sort of happened during the Cold War, but I think is certainly much more the case now. And we're seeing a microcosm of it in all sorts of issues, like, for example, the recent Elon Musk versus the new government in the UK. That kind of storyline is always about picking teams. And the nudge unit said that it wanted to limit people's choice environment. But I think an important knock-on effect of that, and in probably the end goal of it, isn't so much the choice environment as the discussion environment. Because what an illusion of choice does is it establishes the baseline assumptions, the truths, in inverted commas, that nobody questions. And this is the most important function of the limitation of choice, is the limitation of discussion. We have the same underlying assumptions, truths that will not be questioned. With COVID, it was very much, well, should we get the vaccine, or should we all take ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine and that kind of thing? With the Russia-Ukraine conflict, is very much, this is a war that has an ideological disagreement behind it that's important for us all to take a side in, and that kind of thing. And that's what we need to reject, is having our assumptions made for us and having the limitations of discussion set on us.
Well said.
I guess I'll just add my 2 cents, and I do want to say I like that we're a motley crew, and we all have, it's different flavors. We were talking about Kali Yuga before this, and I just want to add in my sort of Christian worldview, where I try to reverse engineer sort of. We know sort of the final destination, which is a world state, from the British Cecil Rhodes and all that stuff that the British elites wrote about a century ago. And so, the Bible prophecy talks about a one world totalitarian state as well, it implies. And so if you're going to have one global power structure, that implies false binary, that there can't be any opposition. So, if you have this East versus West, the Western oligarchy and the Eastern, and someone mentioned earlier, they're both applying the same Agenda 2030 and all that, there's no opposition. And there's always been talked about, I think Anthony Sutton and others, convergence, right? That the goal is for East and West to converge. And, I interviewed the director of the European Council on Foreign Relations a few years back, Mark Leonard, and he wrote a book on it. And he actually discussed, in my interview with him, he says that increasingly China and the US are in many ways becoming more similar rather than very different. And you're going to see basically America becoming more authoritarian. So they're going to be he used the word mimetic. And so they're going to be sort of copying each other until we reach that sort of convergence point. And so that's my way of understanding the false binary, where we're ultimately going to this one destination. And, examples here in Mexico, we had the elections in Mexico not long ago. I refused to vote. And there were 3 political parties, 3 options: Morena, Ciudadano Globalista, which I call Ciudadano, Movimiento Ciudadano, People's Movement, and the old coalition of the old ruling parties. Many of those, the presidents of the old ruling parties were literally CIA agents. And basically they're all, the Morena party, AMLO, who's on his way out, he's been calling for a North American Union, literally. And they've all been down with the lockdown agenda. And so really it wouldn't matter who you would vote for. You're still going to get the same thing. Right now, Mexico City, they just announced they're going to be dividing Mexico City into multiple 15-minute cities. And other cities will be doing that in Mexico. So it had no difference which of the 3 parties that you voted for. That infrastructure is here on the ground. It's being deployed. And it's just like a flavor, your choice of the 3 parties. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how, there's definitely differences depending on where you are and how you see this, but the overarching point, and very similar in general, is just that we all agree that this is about the illusion of choice, about using the illusion of choice to drive you into, in many cases, choosing your own subjugation and thinking that you're picking a side. And it's very obvious we see this in the political sphere today. But I wanted to say a few things that you guys mentioned, right? The idea of, reality is that you're being tricked into thinking that you are choosing opposition. But as you guys all highlighted, that in reality, you're choosing from within, the illusion of the choice, but really picking that same one direction. So in effect, you are no opposition. You're just one flavor or the other in the same ultimate direction. And what Derrick said, which is important, is that, to go to the point of whether the skepticism, as we were kind of saying off air before, I'd much rather see people be skeptical to a fault, even if that hurts them to a degree, than the opposite. But he's right to point out that we have this kind of, and it's logical to see why we're there, but we have this point now where people are being subjective about the way that they choose to dismiss things. And the point ultimately comes down to, like we always say, is yes, question everything, but also consider everything. And that's it's just too long of a tagline, right? So you got to have both of those things to make that ultimately make sense. And so I think what we need to think about is how your emotion plays into this, because that's really what a lot of the propaganda is used for, is to drive you in. And I think this is a good place we can start, in the one of the most obvious examples of this, what we see at the political level in the United States and pretty much anywhere right now, is the lesser of evils dynamic, where this one is just less bad than the other. And we all kind of get driven into that dynamic. And that's emotion that I think plays the most obvious role there. And that's where the propaganda comes in, convincing you that this group, wants to kill children, or this group doesn't care about X, Y, and Z, or, whatever it is to get you to be emotionally outraged about it. So let's go ahead and Go ahead, Derrick. You want to chime in?
Yeah, I want to pick up right there, Ryan, if I can. So yeah, I was thinking about this morning. There's so many different examples of this lesser of two evils. I'll just use the most obvious one right now in the United States, which is Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And we talked about this talked about it in my articles. I'm sure probably everyone here has mentioned it to some degree, but it's worth mentioning again that Kamala Harris is being, supported by the Zionist lobby as well as Donald Trump, and Kamala Harris is being supported by former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, who's a steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group. Also, Alex Karp, co-founder of Palantir, who's also a steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group. There was an article in the New York Times talking about his support for Harris. And then on the other side, of course, we got Peter Thiel, who's helped Trump's VP pick, J.D. Vance, get his Senate win and supported Trump in 2016, is continuing to support him. He's co-founder of Palantir with Alex Karp, but also on the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group. And Trump is, as I said, supported by the Zionist lobby. One of the most obvious and famous examples is through the Adelsons, formerly Sheldon Adelson, now his wife, Miriam Adelson. And that to me is it's just a really clear example of that. But in terms of this deeper talk about voting for the lesser of two evils, I think it is an emotional thing. So I try to think about it from a logical stance. And again, maybe there are people even within our group who might feel this way, maybe not today, but in the broader group, who will say, well, look, I see what you're saying. That might be true, but Trump is better in X, Y, and Z, whatever area. And Harris, if we just let her get in there, if you don't vote for Trump or if you don't do anything at all, then it's going to be full on communism, right? And this is something that I honestly think is extremely dangerous. And even if there's somebody hearing this right now who says like they do support Trump, full on Trump supporter, or even just begrudgingly supporting Trump, using that same language, which they've been using against him, which is he's literally a fascist, all the sort of rhetoric, which I personally don't think is that far overblown. I mean, this is one of the reasons I wanted to put this alliance together. I think there's a huge blind spot in independent alternative media downplaying how dangerous Trump really is and giving him a pass for all sorts of things. Not the same things, of course, that the corporate media comes after him for, Russia, whatever, Stormy Daniels, but legitimate things that he has been involved in and the legitimate ties of him that the corporate media and a lot of the, this mainstream alternative media ignores. But they are correct to say, hey, calling him a fascist and playing up this dangerous language, acting like if he gets elected, it's going to be the end of the world. I don't necessarily think that's going to be true right away. I do think it would lead to bad things. But now Trump's team, of course, and they did this last time before with Biden and they've done it with Clinton, it's literally going to be communism. It's literally going to be Marxism if we don't stop her. Like, oh my God. And I've seen this on Twitter constantly. I've seen this on social media, people making this, I think this is a really base level of thinking. Like, okay, so you criticize Trump. Oh, so then you're supporting Harris, huh? Oh, you're supporting Biden, huh? Or you're supporting Clinton. And you can apply this probably in every country in the world. People who are still so trapped in that they see you attack this person or criticize this person, and whether or not your points are legitimate, they just assume then you must be from the other side. So that's like to me a perfect example. Their mind is stuck in that trap and they can't get beyond assuming, well, if you don't like this, then you must be that. That is definitely an emotional, psychological trap that people are into. And just a little finer point on the whole communism versus fascist thing. I mean, I'm not a communist. I'm not a fascist. I'm not a supporter of right-wing nationalists, authoritarians, or left-wing communists, atheists, whatever. But I do know people in those groups, and the actual communists on the left don't want anything to do with Kamala Harris. And you look at what she stands for. Yes, she's left-leaning, she's progressive, but no, she's not a communist. And the same thing with Trump. The white nationalists and the actual racists on the right wing, they tend to disavow Trump because they don't think he goes far enough. Now, maybe they're both just putting on a mask, and once they get in office, they'll go full on whatever they're into. But I think that this is just dangerous rhetoric that it just continues to hype up. And this is all by design. Again, I think this is exactly what they want. They want the average person in this sort of apocalyptic tones. Trump is like, this is it, vote for me or it's over. Like, we're all going to die. Communism's coming. And then the other side does the same thing. And so the average person, not even truth or awake person, but just the average person is kind of in a state of panic about what's going on. But then at the same time, if you look at the general Trump supporter, they're not fascists, even though I think they're misguided. And you also look at the people who might support Kamala Harris, they're not full on communists either. I mean, maybe there's some in there. They're just average people who lean this way or this way slightly. So I think that, my, biggest takeaway of that whole piece is that the elevation of this apocalyptic tones isn't a positive thing, and it's only going to get worse. And if the independent media plays into that, we're not doing a service to to the people who are listening. We're just hyping them up worse for maybe nothing. You know, things are going to progress towards technocracy, but it's not going to be the end of the world on day one if Trump gets elected or if Kamala Harris is elected.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I was going to say, and feel free, everyone jump in whenever. So wait on ceremony.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
I mean, the thing that strikes me about the I mean, if you've got the partisan people that, you know, for whatever reasons, maybe, you know, it might be an emotional reason, but it might be something else. It might be a belief system that they hold on to particularly strongly that makes them align with one side or the other. But I think politics in general is obsessed with what they call the floating voter, isn't it? It's the undecided people that could swing either way, that make the difference in you know, most marginal seats and most marginal states where that's important, whether it appealing to those people is important. Now, often they do have that mindset, as you said, Derrick, of choosing the lesser of two evils. From their perspective, for most people, that's it. Well, you know, we got to choose the lesser of two evils. But of course, if you're choosing the lesser of two evils, your choice environment is choosing evil. That's it. Your whole entire and I would argue that certainly that if you're going to vote for someone that's going to exert authority to the extent that they can start international wars or not intercede when there's a genocide underway, or you know, that kind of power, that kind of political power, if you're going to invest that in someone and you at the same time you acknowledge that it is the lesser of two evils, then what you're choosing to support by your own definition is evil. So I think that if we were able to, you know, perhaps through, and I think part of the role that's something that the alternative media might be able to do that certainly what I would call the legacy media can't, is appeal to those people to step back for a moment and think about what the choice is that they're being asked to make. Because the choice that they're being asked to make is not in their best interests. If your choice is between one evil or another evil, then quite obviously that choice is not going to be in your best interest. So how do we encourage people to think about, you know, because what we're talking about really is an Overton window that is predetermined, that says, you know, you must walk down this path. It is the only way that you can affect change. The only way that you can affect change is through the path that we've laid out for you. So I think it's really important, and I hope that something that, you know, one of the things that enthuses me about this project is the potential for us to lay out other paths, because it is the insistence that we accept the Overton, as Kit was referring to earlier, the insistence that we accept the narratives and the paradigms that we are given, that compels people to feel black-pilled, probably because they feel like they have no real choice. And I would argue that we all do actually have very real choices that we can make, but by being coerced into looking at this, the lesser of two evils, or the, you know, this controlled narrative, it's easy to feel powerless, it's easy to feel disenfranchised, and it's easy to feel, oh well, screw it, I might as well just vote for the lesser of two evils. And I think we need to get away from that.
Sometimes meeting people where they're at, or using analogies that are going to make a little bit more sense than is some of the more intellectual rhetoric that we use is necessary. And like half a decade or more ago, Whitney Webb was on Slow News Day, and she was like, look, if all you're going to offer me is a crap sandwich, I don't care what kind of bread's on it. I don't care if you've got 13 grain artisanal bread on this or it's San Francisco sourdough on the other. You're feeding me a crap sandwich. Why would I want that? I don't want that. I'm not going to accept it. I'm going to go make my own food.
Yeah, I just wanted to add what Derrick said earlier. I think it's in our human nature to idolize or worship. Again, that's my biblical worldview. We're made to worship God. But this is our problem now, where people are worshiping. They want someone to worship, Trump or Putin. And all of us have seen this reaction. You know, I had someone I question the collective Kremlin on a podcast, and someone messages me and says, I'm unsubscribing. How it's sacrilege to question Putin. And I'm like, and so that's one problem off the bat. And what Derrick was saying earlier, that it's not even Trump as an individual. There's an entire machine behind him, as people have laid out. You've got J.D. Vance, Peter Thiel, all that behind Trump. And so there's the potential either way for Kamala or Trump regime to go totalitarian. And, even myself as a conservative Christian, there's been very, very few Christians pointing out that what Derrick said earlier, that we could eventually see under a Trump presidency something that rhymes with the 1930s Germany, because you're seeing in some of the right movement today in America, some of these folks flirting with Hitler. They're pro-Hitler. They've talked about fascism and theocracy. And so, any which way you cut it, the system could get us to tyranny both ways.
Well, I would just add real quickly, I do, and I'll let you speak, Kit, but I think that the point there that I would argue is that I tend to lean more towards what Derrick is saying in the concept that, and I do see the same thing, but I think the idea being that it's more so about that people are being trapped by these things. Like, I think the misrepresentation of the right or the left is just that, a larger misrepresentation, but highlighting on a problem that does exist within it. And maybe that's exactly what you're saying. But there is an element of that, and I tend to think it comes from other outside entities. But I think it's important to see what you're saying is that either path will ultimately lead you to a level of just top-down authoritarian control, whatever flavor. Right? Go ahead, Kit, if you were going to jump in.
Well, I suppose what I would like to ask a question. How seriously do we even take the floating boat or illusion of choice, the lesser of two evils? In my experience, I've been aware of politics since about the late 1990s, and I've witnessed, therefore, 5 presidential elections, and 3 of them, 2000, 2004, 2020, absolutely no question. If you do any research about it, they were fixed. So, I think to a certain extent, to even talk about the election as if it's going to be in our control is sort of a waste of time. Especially since even if it's not fixed, it's not going to make a lot of difference. It will make entirely aesthetic differences. And I think another thing to consider is the nature of where we are now is not so much the lesser of two evils. I don't hear that when I talk to people. What I hear is my side isn't evil. And it's a question of accepting reality. The same exact job, the same exact fact is pitched as evil when the other side does it and fine when we do it. And I think that's a conditioning of people that's very dangerous and one of the biggest problems we're facing right now. And you see it all the time in small ways. For example, people will post the same interview clips of one politician or another, and a leftist will post it and will say, hey, look at this, Kamala Harris just crashed and burned in this terrible interview. And then, a rightist will say that, and a leftist will say, she owned this interview, it's amazing. It's the same words and the same reaction. And they're simply conditioning people to say, my team is winning, your team is losing, no matter what. My team is right, your team is wrong, no matter what. They've turned people into relay switches as opposed to actual thinkers.
Yeah, this is a fascinating point you bring up, and this gets into another part, I would argue, of the same problem, which is the technocracy element of the false binary, right? Where now you've got, the question is, are those even real people? I'm not disagreeing that there's clearly that element, and that's what's interesting is you see what I call the team sport politics part of it, which I'd like to believe is the minority. I'd maybe wishful thinking, but the ones that are just doesn't matter, I'm going to choose them or my side because that's what I've chosen. Then I see that there are liberals and conservatives that still lean those ways, but I think more and more are questioning it. I definitely see that it's just ridiculous how it doesn't matter what the content is. But I sense on the larger majority of people are the ones that are kind of well, I'm still going to lean this way because I think Trump's better. But that's the largest response I get by and large on engaging with people online is that, well, they're both pretty bad, but he's not as bad. And so, you bring up an excellent point. And I think to your voting aspect, and you guys, I'm sure you know my opinion on this, I'm of the mind our vote simply does not translate, maybe never, but I think it's clear, as you guys are highlighting, that it's not one side or the other. I think every side cheats to the best way, to the most, to to the extent that it can every single time. And I think that's what our system has been boiled down to. So I see it, and this includes in the point of, the lesser of evils in and of itself is a scam, because as Ian was saying, that, either way, even if that is the reality, by partaking in that guarantees the never-ending cycle of doing the same thing, right? So that's one side. But on this side of it, as Kit was saying, and I agree, if your vote doesn't actually translate, or even just somewhere in the middle, which every party seems to be able to identify it when it suits them, they stole it or he cheated, that it doesn't fully translate, that there are lots of levers that are used. So we need to consider that. And so my point in saying all of that is that it comes down to ultimately that box check is simply consenting for the same broken dynamic. And I'll always add to that I will always say that if you believe that makes a difference, then absolutely do it. Just don't pretend that it's the only thing to do, let alone even the most important. Vote for what you actually believe in, stand by your principles, whether third party or even if it's one of the two. But the problem with the lesser of evils is, my opinion, I see most people being channeled into that when they might vote for Jill Stein, or they might want to abstain if that was, it's supposed to be an option they don't have, and so that's kind of where I see it all coming down to. So a lot of interesting perspectives on this, largely in the same, illusion of choice perspective. But so why don't we broaden it out? If there, whoever wants to jump in, beyond the election lesser of evils, like just the larger global human history discussion of the false binary and how it might be used in ways outside of that, or even within it. Whoever wants to jump into it next.
Well, Ryan, I want to just add one more thing on the election side before we move too far off. And I think that one of the issues that we're running into, at least that I'm seeing, and it kind of touches on what we mentioned as far as people being like, yes, I hear what you're saying, Bilderberg, Zionism, this and that, but he, she, whoever is better in this way, or, like you said, they're just stuck in the politics aspect of it. I think the other thing is that people are holding on to, whether it's Trump or any other politician, as the last hope, or whatever element of the binary we're talking about. It doesn't have to be about the politics. It can be any aspect where people are clinging to one or the other. Right. Is they're sort of afraid to let go of that, because if they acknowledge that, okay, these things may be true about Trump, and they may be true about Kamala Harris, and they may be true about this politician or this other thing, then what comes next? Okay, if I accept that, then I have to accept that maybe there's nobody else coming to save me. And I think this is a big part of the psychological thing. This is why the Q thing had so much power, and still apparently does for a lot of people. Because I've even had some people, when I go back and forth with them about Trump or any sort of binary, and we, if they're really willing to have a logical conversation and here's some data, okay, let's talk about it. They eventually get to the point where they say, okay, I hear you and I see you. But if that's true, then we're screwed. Then we're totally screwed. So if what you're saying is actually factual, and I'm willing to consider that, then we are totally screwed, and there's no way around that. So people have kind of built in their identities, particularly with the politicians, and it's like either they don't want to, or psychologically they're just not capable of it at the moment to consider that the person, the entity, organization, whatever they put their hope in is corrupted, isn't what they bought into. And they're not ready to, and you could call this cognitive dissonance or whatever, but they're not ready to take those next steps, which would then unravel that whole kind of paradigm, and then cause them to say, okay, well, then what do I have to do for myself? I need to take some personal responsibility, and then sort of tied into that. And I don't think this is a job of journalists or reporters or podcasters or content creators necessarily, but I do think it's part of the reason there is pushback, and that is people will say, okay, then what's your solution, right? Mm-hmm. So they have this sort of reaction, okay, I'm willing to consider it, but if that's true, we're screwed. Okay, I'm willing to consider it, but if that's true, well, what's your solution? What are we going to do about it? Do you have anything better for me than voting for the lesser of two evils? Because if you don't, then I'm just going to keep doing this. And, this is one of the reasons I try to focus on solutions. But again, I don't think that's necessarily the job of a journalist per se. We're there to point out things that exist and facts, and then hopefully people are educated enough and mature enough to then take those facts and do something about it. But I do think that's part of the problem, is people are like willing to consider it, but then have that reaction of, well, I guess I'm screwed if that's factual, and if that is true, what else am I supposed to do? And until maybe there is something better to offer, they're going to just say, well, I guess I'll just keep playing the same game.
And that kind of overlaps with this point. Go ahead, Ian. Go ahead.
I mean, one of the problems we've got in the UK is that the British people, they're not they've already shown in the last election that they're not actually interested in the game so much. I think there's pretty good research that shows that the turnout was something like 52% in the last general election. So that's nearly half of the population couldn't be bothered to elect anybody. But that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter to the, the powers that shouldn't be, because, we've still got a Labour government at the moment that got 17.5% of the electoral vote. 1 in 6 people didn't vote. Only 1 in 6 people actually voted for it. And it's got a massive parliamentary majority for the next 5 years and can pretty much do whatever it likes. So the fact that people voted with their feet and couldn't be bothered to elect any political leaders. I mean, by far the biggest single block vote was for no government, for nobody. That was the biggest, political statement that came out of the last general election, and then at the same time, so how do people respond to that? Well, people have responded to that in the UK recently, with so-called, riots, although the extent, the reporting on the riots, talking about setting your fake choice environment, the reporting on the riots in the UK, the extent to which they've exaggerated it is unbelievable. I mean, it's even included claiming riots happened that didn't even happen. So I mean, they're constantly creating these fake kind of choices and fake binaries to keep us tied into the game. The point is to keep us playing along with the game. But even if, as is recently been shown in the UK, the biggest single group of people decide that they don't want to play the game anymore, that they're not interested, then we have, the propagandists are set forth to try and suck us back into the game. But if we won't play, then we're just ignored. So I think, it's, one of the hopeful things, I guess, that I took out of the UK election result was the fact that people clearly are showing that they're pulling away from that forced upon them political paradigm.
That's why I think this is all happening. And another reason why I think what we're doing here is so important. And to go back to what Derrick said, which is interesting, is that I'm actually completely blown away by the idea that anybody can present a data set. Here are the facts, or at least what we perceive to be the facts. And somebody can engage with that and go, yeah, that's pretty airtight. But what do you suggest? And we go, well, I don't know. And they go, well, I'm going to keep doing the same thing then. It's like that logic, that cycle blows me away, because you're acknowledging there's a problem. And, sure, even if you can't perceive in that moment a better path, you're still going, well, I'm just going to keep doing the thing that you just showed me and I acknowledged was not even legitimate. And so the problem becomes that we get stuck in this trap. And this is where the emotion comes in. Then you get the bombardment of all the propaganda of the parties. You get the technocratic side of it. But the problem is that if we're acknowledging that there's a broken system, potentially the level that your vote doesn't even translate, that means that, as you just highlighted, that even if we do what we believe could make the change possible, the system is going to lash out. That's what I think is happening right now. You're going to see more happen, more. They're going to amp up the anger, the unhappiness, the uncomfortable, and everything's going to feel like your world's getting more terrifying. In some cases it is, to drive you back into that position. But my point is that if we see that as being a possible action that might affect change, knowing they're going to respond that way, it's most logical to point out that you're going to have to go through something like that. You're going to have to go through cycles of them still trying to force this down your throat, pretending this person was picked and they made it all much worse. And maybe we can see some change through that. But nonetheless, the reality is that it is, in fact, in this position. And we can see the numbers. That's what I keep saying about the US side of it, is let's demonstrate to the world or whoever else is in the mindset that we're not represented in all of this. That's why I think abstention, which is supposed to be tallied and counted and put on the screen next to everybody else, it's just not anymore, because it would demonstrate that same thing. So I think that's really the interesting part of it, is that's where all of this is being driven technocratically, the propaganda, because once we go past that barrier, I don't think any of this will even matter anymore. They might as well just come out and say, too late. We've been lying to you the whole time, but now it doesn't matter. So shut up and go back to sleep. It's kind of what I feel coming.
I just want to add what Derrick said. By the way, someone in the chat says, what color is the pill of I don't give a FUCK anyway? I go with Legal Man, who says he's cyanide pilled. So cyanide pill. But
that's
I think what
it's funny because they call us that, right?
Right. Well, yeah. But what Derrick said, though, I think is important. We are screwed. Like we are screwed. And I don't have a problem coming to that realization. I have otherworldly comfort for that, and people can find their ways of staying sane, understanding we are screwed. I think people do have to grow up and realize, we're screwed. And there's people that I know where I'll send them factual mainstream information demonstrating how screwed we are. They're bringing in digital IDs, all this stuff. And then these people will have a knee-jerk reaction. We're like, no, stop. I can't. Don't send it to me, because they cannot handle this dark truth of where we really are. And I think we need to get to that. People need to get to that point, to that mountain of like, we are screwed. And then, like Derrick was saying, I don't have the solutions. We all have to sort of figure stuff out individually and collectively of the way forward. But we have to get to that point where we are screwed. You know, like I said, here in Mexico, they're building out 15 minutes. I live in a 15-minute city. To go back to Europe now, I'm also a Croatian citizen, and they're going live now with the entry-exit system, ETIAS. So now to go home, I can still go back and forth, but for my family, I have to fill out a social credit form for each of them, wait to be approved.
Wow.
You know, then theoretically they could deny it, so I could be not denied from going back to my own home. And so we are screwed. Let's all understand that, and then from there we can, I think, move forward.
We'll go to Steve next, real quick, Steve. We'll go to you right next. But I just want to make sure we're going to get to solutions today in the show. We're going to end with that. And I do think that ultimately what we're saying is that, you know, I would just say that I agree that you could say screwed or in a bad position, but I definitely think that there are solutions out of that. And we can disagree on that. I mean, I just think that the idea is that I do think we can find paths to push back and change. And even if we end up in a position that they're building, even then, I feel like we'd all agree we should still resist. But I'm sure you would agree with that. Right? So go ahead, Steve.
Yeah. So the recognition that we're screwed is a recognition that the systems that have been forced upon us have screwed us, and there is not a pathway towards, you know, salvation or prosperity or freedom through those systems. So that should then logically mean we've got to operate outside of those systems if we want to be less screwed. It's not just, oh, well, I guess it's all messed up, so I'm going to go ahead and check out. And that's what so many people have been pushed to do through the psyop of the black pill, as opposed to going, this is actually fairly liberating. This is revelatory. This is something that I can now take and then put my own solutions out into the world, collaborate with other people who have their ideas. We'll see which ones work best. Tradition is just stuff that worked, right? That we can repeat. So if we're flipping that on its head and saying, okay, well, the tradition of these institutions that have been set up that basically make it a consent ritual for bloodline pedophiles instead of one person, one vote, you know, we don't have to do that. It doesn't have to be this way. As everybody's pointed out, there's more of us that don't participate in the nonsense to begin with than there are people that have been suckered into, you know, continuing to play this game. We are the majority universally. I would argue it doesn't matter what country you're in. It doesn't matter what system of oppression or authoritarianism you're under. It's that only because of the proliferation of what has become the technocratic grid that they're even allowed to continue with such a small number of people.
Yeah, I think that's an important realization. Just to jump in on that, the admission it's not that we're screwed exactly. It's that the system is not fixable the way it is.
Well put.
The system that exists is done. It's broken. People say we're staving off tyranny, and we're not. We live in a tyrannical system globally. Just a few years ago, 90% of the country was basically nailed inside their houses just because 0.05% of the country said that they had to be. That's tyranny. We're surveilled all the time. Drone strikes happen. We live, I mean, I saw a good comment about this on, I forget where now, just a couple of weeks ago. If you took somebody from Western Europe or the United States, 1960, 63, and planted them in this time now, they wouldn't say, man, this place is on the verge of tyranny. They'd say this was a dystopian hellhole. They would be appalled at the state of the way we live our lives. I think that's important to realize. But I think the disenfranchisement of the voter, so long put to us as a bad thing, like people have been saying, oh, the turnout is so low. This is political talking points. You've got to get out there and vote, because obviously they won't go vote because it legitimizes their system. Right. Low turnout is good. Low turnout is people don't believe you. People don't believe in the left and the right, the red and the blue. It's all bollocks. And I think that's the reason we're in the system we're in right now. The crisis is not ours so much as it is the system trying to recover from a crisis. There's a good article, well, not a good article, an interesting article in The Atlantic just a couple of days ago, which I'll send everybody the link, said, how come COVID didn't unite us against a common enemy? This was the talking point. And I think that is a very important talking point, because that was the plan. That was the end goal of the pandemic storyline, was, you know what, nationalities and political parties and all of that, they've all failed us. What we need is a nice, big, family-friendly UN that's going to run the planet and sort everybody out. And we can all get behind that because nobody wants to die of a disease. And nobody wanted to take part in that. Right. I mean, the vaccine uptake was never as high as it wanted to be. People broke lockdowns. People didn't respond. People disengaged from a tyrannical system. And the two-party illusion of choice, like revolution that's been since about 2022, has been trying to get people back involved in that system, to give them what they believe is a choice, and to get them involved in a system where they know now they don't have a stake and there is no way for them to win. And I think the lower the turnout gets, the better it is. I think the solution will eventually be simply that the political reality exists totally separately from physical reality. And the parties and the journalists will talk about things that don't matter or that didn't happen, whilst individuals, billions of individuals, simply get on with their lives, not listening to them anymore. And I don't think there's a better solution than that.
Ryan, can I just jump in there real quick? Go ahead, Ian.
No, I mean, just one of the things. I mean, talking about the kind of false, choices that we're given. I mean, one of the ideas that, you're talking about the idea of who is screwing us, right? So who is screwing us? If it's people like Eric Schmidt or Elon Musk or people like now, so they people that want to stick chips in our brains, or people that want to live forever. If you bumped into these people in the street and they started laying out their ideas, you'd think you wouldn't give them the time of day, would you? You'd think, well, it's very nice meeting you. Thanks for talking to me. I'm off. Now, that's exactly the approach that we can take. It's very nice listening to your opinions. Thanks for telling us about all your crazy plans for world domination. See you later.
Right.
Go ahead, Derrick. Yeah, so I just wanted to add, I think Kit hit on a couple of really important things there. And the first point, as far as uniting with the common enemy, I think that is really, it sums up what the ultimate goal of whatever the different debates around COVID-19 84, that it was trying to unite the world and we have a common enemy. And this reminds me of just how this effort is still going on. I'll just mention that I'm headed to New York City tomorrow to go to the UN to report on the Summit of the Future, which is very much with this same mentality. Now, they don't have the whole world locked down currently, but it's the same thing. They're saying we're facing the poly crisis. We're facing global shocks to the world in different ways, and it has shown that national sovereignty is no longer sufficient. The UN is 80 years old. It's not fit for purpose anymore, whether it's pandemics or economic crises or wars. They're even talking about threats from space and all kinds of things. And they're going to sign the Pact for the Future. All the countries, 193 member states of the UN, are planning on signing this, including Mexico, including all of the countries we're broadcasting from right now, to basically give the UN power for whatever they declare next, whatever sort of multiple shocks, emergency, whether it's a claimed pandemic or something else. So they're still trying to do that same effort, and the message is very much about that, like having a common enemy. The world can no longer handle the poly crisis, these emerging crises. At the same time, it's clear national governments aren't able to keep up with it. So they're still trying, whether through politics or just through extra, national government, or organization documents and treaties and things like that. They're still trying to unite the world. I don't think most people are paying attention. And the other thing, just really briefly, it's odd for me to say this because I do, I'm an anarchist. I definitely don't vote in national politics or really at all. But it's interesting for me to see how much focus goes on the national level. And I still do think there is some level, especially if you're in smaller places, maybe not major cities, where you can have an impact on the local level. I'm not necessarily saying run for office or anything like that, but I did run for office in Houston, where I'm originally from, which is a major city. But even on that level, there's 4 million people in Houston, just as an example. 200,000 people elect the mayor of the fourth largest city of the United States, who then goes on to make international deals and do all kinds of things. And nobody's paying attention, and not really in a positive way. It's not like the sort of thing we're talking about where they're not paying attention and then they're all growing their own food and they don't believe politicians and we're building parallel systems, which is what I think is the solution. No, they're just checked out. They're just not paying any attention. They're just, and there's multiple reasons. That's a whole nother conversation. But I think that's really scary in some way, because everybody's so focused on the national thing. And even then, there's still millions of people who don't vote and don't bother to participate. And I think that's a great thing. But it would be even better if they weren't voting and they were doing something else. Instead of just being apathetic, they've checked out. Now, maybe that doesn't really apply to the truth community that we're speaking, but I think it probably does in some ways, because there's a lot of people out there who just watch podcast after podcast after podcast and don't actually do anything in their own communities, don't get involved in any way, don't know, the people in their neighborhoods. They're not trying to build any local independence or freedom or whatever on that ground level. They're just checked out. And so I don't know, really what the answer is to that. I have my own thoughts, but I just wanted to make that point, that the disengagement with the system on the local level, it's not really helping us, because they're advancing the agendas. These agendas come from on high, but at the same time, they pass them through the school boards, through the town councils and the city councils. That's how you get to a 15-minute city and things like that. And while everybody's so focused on the hyper, federal and national levels, things are going on in their own backyard that they're just totally clueless to.
Yeah, I would add to that. And just, I think we're always arguing that if, again, first in general, regardless of our opinion or my opinion, if you think voting makes a difference, I still recommend that you take that action. But like Derrick said, just don't see it as the only thing you should be doing. Local level, as always, has the most effect in any kind of change, I would argue, in that concept. But to your point, I would argue that, the idea, whatever term, exit or checkout or whatever we're calling it, is, I think what we're all kind of saying is that from that broken, engaged system, but still push back. Right, still take action to change it, still speak up, still do things that I think have far more effect than checking that box, but don't consent within that broken system, or, follow your heart in that, but still push back, whatever your choice may be. And I think that's important. Now, I do know that we had limited time overall, and so I'm not exactly sure when everyone has to jump off, but I say we go ahead and, before I said, if you want to get into that and kind of broaden that out, if you see any perspectives on how the false binary applies to other things, feel free and jump in. I thought the technocracy angle would be important to highlight, like Kit brought up, and how that whole, both the driving of the digital panopticon, as well as the fact that, half the internet today are bots, and how these different things are affecting the way we see it. But then we can end with just general solutions we think we might bring to the table to potentially, take other choices within the voting discussion or whatever else we think are relevant. So anybody want
Ryan,
to
just one quick note just for the audience, guys. Like this is just the introduction panel. So we understand this binary can be applied to different areas, and we're going to discuss how this applies to, different political sides pushing for digital IDs and technocracy. We're going to be getting much deeper as these panels progress. This is just sort of the introduction to the false binary concept, and you will see a rotating cast of different people who are part of our alliance coming and contributing their thoughts and their ideas. I just wanted to make that clear.
As well as, by the way, articles and other forms of content. And that's going to be important, because it's going to be a whole, different level of, on wherever central location we end up choosing. But but anybody else want to jump in regard to any of those topics?
I will. Certainly on the technocracy angle and the technological angle, I think a really good example of fake binary thinking is taking place across the social media landscape right now. And I think it's a microcosm of the greater thing as well, because if you remember a few years ago, Twitter, before it became X, used to simply ban people. It banned thousands of people. And the line has always been, just like with banks and businesses, always been, well, if you don't like it, then start your own bank, start your own social media platform. And then people did, which was actually not good. People went and started independent social media platforms. And I think what you're seeing now is a recalibration. Okay, don't start your own social media platform, because whether you're a leftist, then you can go on Facebook. If you're a free speech absolutist, in quotes, then you can go on X. And there's a social media for you that definitely is absolutely independent and not like surveilling you and reporting everything you say to the FBI or anything like that. That's the illusion of choice right now. Either you're a nice social media person or you're a nasty social media person. From the evil, like Musk side, I think that's a really good example of what we're talking about.
Yeah, most definitely. Anybody thoughts on that? I definitely think that the technocracy angle is very prominent in just about everything that we're doing. And really just the larger term aside, like the specifics of what you're highlighting, whether using social media platforms to influence large world events, elections around the world. We saw this with Venezuela and Elon Musk. There's so many of these aspects, and that's from like a personal, persona, like he's a technocrat, oligarch, military contractor who's speaking up, which by the way, I find to be a very fuzzy line between like, are you part of the government? And especially now that he might have a position on Trump's cabinet, once that officially starts, what does that change? Is he allowed to then still speak up again? Because it's interesting overlap of how they're talking about other countries blocking what they're doing, or, I think we'd all agree that if that he came out and said these are Chinese nationals and just deleted people, most people wouldn't push back on that, right? So it's interesting how it's all just kind of floated as assumption, but I think that where it's going with these platforms is kind of Pied Pipering people into expecting, just like you were saying, Kit, that this is the good version, right? Here's the good AI coming from the Musk side of it, even though it drives you, just like we're talking about from the point today, into the same direction, and I think that's an alarming reality of using these characters like Musk to trick people. And the same thing we saw with COVID-19. The people that I would argue, push back the most against these things often get pacified by this kind of dynamic, like with Trump and COVID-19.
In fact, sorry, just one final thought on that. The fact we've also kind of been stuck at here because we're talking about Elon Musk as if he's anything on X but a picture and a username. He probably doesn't write his own tweets. It's a political agenda distributed to a group of interns that take shifts, almost certainly, just like with Joe Biden and all the others.
Well, this is the same Elon Musk that said, I'm going to buy Twitter and I'm going to copy the CCP's WeChat, and I'm going to turn Twitter into WeChat. And so now you have WeChat West and WeChat East, which is in and of itself another false binary. Right. It's one of those things that if we're completely serious about it, what Elon Musk is promising is you are going to spend and your entire existence is going to flow through X. That's the only way you're going to be able to pay bills. It's the only way you're going to be able to interact with people. It's the only way you're going to be able to get any, work done or information out. And it's where the main aggregate of all other information is going to flow. This is something that people refuse to recognize, even though you've got the entire PayPal mafia who is now backing former Democrat Donald Trump, former Democrat RFK Jr., former Democrat Tulsi Gabbard. On the other hand, you've got, part of the PayPal mafia and then the Google mafia that's backing Kamala Harris with, neocon Dick Cheney and the entire neocon cabinet. And it's been this almost inversion in order to repackage the same crap sandwich that people keep selling us over and over and over and over. And each and every one of us individually have discussed multiple different solutions and multiple different avenues that we can go to reclaim this. To Ryan's point about voting locally, if you want to get a grip on your community, the very first thing you have to do is install your own sheriff and take control of your sheriff's department, because that's the enforcement mechanism. Through that, you can then get a handle on your city council or on your county government, on your larger governmental offices. But if you don't start where the enforcement mechanisms are applied first, it doesn't matter if you get one Green Party candidate or one Libertarian candidate on a city council once every 18 years, because their words, their thoughts, and their vote ultimately is smothered by the enforcement mechanism. So there are limited strategic ways to do this, but you have to trust that they're going to count the votes right. And I don't. I think the easiest way to do this, as Derrick was saying, is try to establish some parallel systems, try to establish a parallel economy, try to employ as many different varied methods of counter economics as possible, because they've got us on a fiat currency that is totally manipulatable. They're trying to push. We just did a story this morning about how BlackRock has come out and full support of Bitcoin, among other different cryptocurrencies. So there's a number of different things that we do have available to us. We talk about them all the time. It cracks me up when people are like, "Oh, you guys are just cynical and you're just black pill." No, the vast majority of those people shut down as soon as you tell them that their personal hero in a form of a politician doesn't have their best interests at heart, and you can prove it. If you know, to Hervoy's point about we're screwed, yes, of course, as long as we keep relying on these institutions and these systems that have proven themselves to be abject failures in terms of their own marketing, let alone what they're doing to us each and every day.
I just wanted to add just one further example of how far the false binary goes. And people have talked about Trump and Putin and Musk and, Nayib Bukele in El Salvador. People laud him as some wow. And, he's done some good things, but I haven't heard anyone point this out. And I mean, look, AMLO I found articles from the last 2 years, mainstream articles, where Lopez Obrador gives an interview. He says literally we should copy the EU and integrate Canada, USA, and Mexico. Then I found an article of Bukele. He says the same thing. He said literally we should copy the EU and create a Central American Union. And then I found an interview with Rafael Correa, ex-president of Ecuador. And again, he's kind of that sort of figure. He was pro-WikiLeaks, right? Pro-Assange. And guess what? He comes out and he literally says, we should copy the EU and create a South American Union. And then I think it's important for people to understand how bad things are. Like I said earlier, we are screwed. But, okay, now we understand fully the picture. Now let's see what we can do. And, people, again, solutions. People look to us for solutions. People in the chat, writing stuff. And I always stick with one of my guests brought up Teddy Roosevelt's quote that said, do what you can with what you got where you're at. And I think it's that simple. Don't necessarily look to us for solutions. You do something. And where I am in Mexico, you mentioned sheriffs. That doesn't apply really outside of the U.S. Literally, the cops in Mexico are a cartel member. I can tell you stories all day from around me how, the cops are, they're not going to help you. They're literally, the cops in Mexico are kidnapping and murdering Mexicans. There's a story just last week about that in Guerrero. They're investigating 60 cops for Mexican cops for renditioning Mexicans. But, White Rose, that was big during COVID. I bought one of those brother printers, and I was in Spanish. This is counter propaganda. I was throwing them up all over the supermarkets, the parks, everywhere I can. This is a small version of resistance, because we have to get where we are, the population, we have to get a critical mass of people to understand what's going on, to then be able to push back. And so, and there's tech solutions. You've got, above phone, de-Googling your phone, all this sort of stuff, and just doing what we can, not just necessarily looking to us for solutions. Listeners who are listening, what can you do? Don't just look to me.
Right. Well, go ahead, Ian.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, if we think about who is screwing us, and the technocracy that is being installed top down, which is putting out policy trajectories that are then filtered down to the national and local government level, that are then applied to us in our daily lives, that we are subject to. And going to what Derrick was saying and what Hervoy was saying about what we can do in our local communities and our local areas to stand against that and not be resigned to not being able to defeat the system in any way. I mean, I always think that it's important to think about the central pillars of what is trying to be installed, because the false binary, whichever way you look, whichever you choose, whether you choose Trump or Harris, whether you choose Conservative or Labour, whatever choices you make, whether you go on Twitter, or whether you go on Facebook, or whether you go on Gab, or whatever you do, the central pillars of control, which is always about consolidating and centralizing authoritarian control, are the things like digital ID, digital currency, financial inclusion. These are the kind of things that they want to install, no matter which side of the fence you look at the problem from. So if we are if we want to take measures that we want to take control and we want to defeat that, and people always talk about decentralization and how we can decentralize away from that system, that decentralization does come down to the personal level. It does come down to the individual, because I know individuals, for example, that they've spent the last few years getting things like normal terraced houses in the middle of urban areas off grid. But these are the kind of things that can be done, but they can only be done if we can consistently think about the little things that we do every day that make a change to perhaps lead us towards something that is important to us and the people that we care about. Now, that doesn't mean following any kind of cause necessarily, although that might be part of it. But I think the danger is, and something that we often talk about in terms of this false binary choice, is that it does lead people into a sense of powerlessness. But in reality, our power is not going to come through fighting the system. Our power is going to come through subverting and moving around the system. That's where we can exert genuine control over our lives, because the whole point of the technocratic panopticon is to take that control away from us. So we need to regain it over every aspect of our life that we can.
100% agree.
Yeah. I would just as a good example that we didn't think to mention, but a really good example coming from the right is Milei in Argentina, who was meant to be this crazy anarchist who was going to change everything. And you know what? Vaccines, debt, whatever, is all the same. Supporting Israel. But to go back to the solutions discussion, the black pill accusation, I think, is a psyop. It's designed to shut down that discussion. You say, I don't believe in this, I don't trust that. People say, so, okay, you don't believe anything. But no, I don't believe in top-down power, and I don't believe in the two-party system. And there are other options. That's not believing in anything. People have individual moral principles. People have innate sense of right and wrong. And that is the solution to everything in the end. And when people say, what is your solution? What do you think you should do? Well, my solution is doing this. And I think that if we simply put, I've taken it upon myself to try and help people realize what's going on, because I believe once people realize what's going on, they won't need any further instruction. People will take care of themselves as long as they're alert and awake.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think that's kind of what Derrick was saying as well, is, we've chosen this path. And in many cases, people like Derrick is a great example. There's a lot of great work on solutions, which we can go to him next and we can start with that. But I think the point being is that what we're doing in general by informing people, or even just keeping the conversation going and keeping people connected, is one of those paths, right? And so it's all, in my opinion, I'll just start with this from my perspective, is I think the most important immediate solution is empowering yourself and taking responsibility for your own life and your own actions, and recognizing that by checking that box, even if you think that's the best person or the lesser of two evils, is not going to affect the change that you think it will in what we're discussing today. And instead, as the old saying, my entire career I've been saying this, vote with your dollar or vote with your actions, and realize that is having more effect in the world. And there are people like Derrick and plenty of others out there who are actively outlining ways to actually, whether it's exit and build or just simply take action from within the system, or as we pointed out, vote third party or abstain, or all sorts of different things, presenting all the different solutions we think might be better suited than simply going through the same motions, is hardly black pilled. And I think that's the illusion you're speaking to. And I think it forces people into thinking the only adult thing to do is fall back into line. But that's, I think, why Ian's point shows you that half the country is saying, well, we don't want to do that. And I think that's why this is all happening. And there's so much chaos, is people are pulling back at a time when they're pushing even further, even harder. And that's inspiring to a degree. So, Derrick, did you want to start with we kind of end with just solutions and different perspectives, as I think we've already kind of gotten into what we think, what people could do other than in the voting conversation, but anything else as well?
Sure, yeah, and I'll have to leave in just a few minutes, but definitely, I think Steve and a few others already sort of touched on it. But for anybody out there who's looking for ideas, of course, I make no claims to have perfect solutions that are going to apply in every situation, every single person all around the world, or anything like that. I don't think there is such a thing. Also, I would say that I think the real solutions that I believe in, and I think that a few others have touched on, are more time consuming. Sometimes there can be a financial cost, not always, but time consuming. It's more about changing your lifestyle. It's more about changing your habits. And I think that's what can be discouraging, or at least people, their tendency is to say, oh, no, that sounds difficult, because they'd rather just go press the button and think that by voting or being apathetic and like, oh, I'm so cool, I checked out of society. Like I said, I think there's a difference between those who are aware, but they're just checking out, they're tuning in, dropping out, whatever, of society, but not actually doing anything. And then those who are, hey, the system's messed up, I'm going to focus on what I can actually do in my community. There's a difference. So maybe the people who have checked out and aren't doing anything, those are the actual black-pilled people who are really nihilistic and cynical and aren't doing anything. But I don't think that's what anybody in our alliance is about. That's why we're being proactive and even making this effort, because we still think there are solutions, that there's at least some still hope. Maybe we are totally screwed to some extent within that system, as everybody here has recognized, but that doesn't mean that we can't, whether you have, as you were hinting to earlier, brother, about like faith in the afterlife, or just you have your own ways to kind of feel comfortable with what we're facing. I personally believe that we should try to do what we can now, even if it doesn't impact our lives, but for those who are coming after us. So there are definitely going to be people born after us, and they're either going to be born into total technocracy, tyranny, with no choice or other option, and that's just normal everyday life. Or perhaps some of the efforts that we here and others listening and others around the world quietly doing the work put in can lead to the creation of counter economies, parallel systems in healthcare. And I mean, I kind of have a big vision for trying to counter everything they're doing: food production and distribution systems, healthcare systems, et cetera. These things aren't going to happen overnight, but I know that if we don't even make the effort, and if we're not even trying to say, for example, use technology that is available to us. We all know technology is a tool. There's a lot of scary ways technology is being used to survey and monitor us and blow up pagers and things like that. There's also other ways, and people who are, like the above phone was mentioned earlier, people who are trying to use the technological tools available to us in the best way that is possible. And I think this also requires being adaptable. This is one thing I saw during COVID 1984. I was living in Mexico and helping people come down from the US and cross the border into Mexico, totally legally, but it was just people who were like, I don't know, I've never done this before, but I need to get away from this tyrannical place I'm living in. People were coming from the UK, from Germany, from Canada, from Australia. And those people were being proactive. They literally, in some cases, sold their stuff, packed up their belongings, and said, you know what, for the safety of me and my family, I'm going somewhere that seems a little safer. That's the whole exit and build idea I talk about. People can go to theconsciousresistance.com and just search exit and build. You'll see a lot of presentations I've given and videos about that. I'm going to be doing a thing about it tomorrow you can check out. But I think the point is being adaptable, being flexible. While things are calm, you have the opportunity to start planning and saying, okay, I'm going to get involved in the local community garden or the CSA or the permaculture farm or whatever, and just volunteer one day on the weekend and learn a little bit of skills. Or maybe you don't want to get your hands dirty, so at least get to know the people who are growing the food you like, or taking care of the animals so you can get eggs and whatever else it is in your diet. Getting closer to that, not being dependent on the systems they've built. At the very least, I think if we move in that direction, whether we quote unquote fail in building parallel systems in our lifetime, at the very least, we will lessen our dependence on these systems. And, I call the coming systems, CBDCs, technocracy, digital IDs, all that, slavery systems, because that's exactly where they're going. So we either just, okay, I'm so awake and I see what's coming, but I'm going to do nothing. As our alliance member, James Corbett, calls it, you're just watching the conspiratainment, just the infotainment. Okay, what's Ian up to? What's James up to? What's Ryan up to? But you're not doing anything out there. You're still going to end up subject to these same systems. So rather than just being awake, I call it being activated, trying to actively be working on avoiding these coming slavery systems, which are coming very quickly, and focusing on what we can build outside of them. That's, my main focus. Again, people can search exit and build at theconsciousresistance.com and learn more.
Now, a few of you already kind of touched on some solutions, but feel free if you'd like to add something. It's kind of out the door here if you want to touch on solutions and thoughts.
I just want to add on a philosophical point. I like this quote from Imran Khan I found some years back, where he said, if victory is certain, even a coward will fight. But real bravery is when one dares to fight when defeat is certain. I think of German pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer, during the 30s. He had been in New York. He had escaped Nazi Germany, and he could have stayed there in comfort in America. He decided to go back into the frying pan, and he participated in the conspiracy to attempt to assassinate Hitler. The war ended, and the Nazis hanged him after the war ended. And I think that's sort of the, what Derrick was saying earlier. I think, you know, we all have to put our heads above the parapet, be willing to suffer, and so forth. And, you know, for people, you know, to think, like someone was saying earlier, I never even wanted to be a podcaster. I was a teacher. COVID happened. I got offered a radio gig that ended. And I'm like, okay, I have this podcast, so I'll continue. And then I've got, you know, DHS taking me off of PayPal and stuff. And so, you know, we all have to be willing, even if what Derrick said earlier, I've got kids, you know, and I'm willing to throw myself in the gears to make the next generation's lives less worse. And so I think that's kind of the philosophy we have to have going forward.
You're here. Well, anybody else want to chime in? I was going to end with a couple thoughts, unless you guys wanted to chime anything else. So I generally just want to add to kind of piggyback on what Derrick said. And so I think I agree completely with the idea that we're talking about, you know, just simply tuning into it or even just being entertained by the chaos is the, you know, it's not a solution. It's not productive to any change. But I would argue that people that are out there who maybe you're busy with everything else in your life and you're taking time to make sure you're keeping informed, there is a level of positivity to that. I'm sure Derrick agrees with that, like making sure you know what's going on and you're taking action when and where you can. Not, you know, I know there's a lot of people out there, and this is part of the design to keep you trapped, is that you're working 70 hours a week. You know, really, it's impossible for you to find that time, but taking part in these conversations and sharing this is a part of this as well. And I think that's important to point out. But I would simply just say, like I said before, it comes down to small choices. It comes down to the reality that, as everyone's highlighted here, that it may be likely, and I think it's almost a certainty, that even as we take positive change and steps to make this, to force this to change or build something separate, we will be attacked. It will be suppressed. It will be, you know, the lashing out of the dying animal, the cornered animal, whatever you want to call it. We will see that. And so it's important to recognize that it will be framed as something bad. It will be framed as failing. You know, everything we've ever seen, anything that resists the system gets framed that way. And so we have to fall back on the personal responsibility, the principles, stand by what you believe in, and take the small choices in your life and elsewhere, and just, you know that that's the right path. And I think the point is, in a worldwide view, if we all took that action, we would see something absolutely change. And it may just come to the point to where it exposes the fact that they are a complete dictatorship that doesn't care, or your vote has no effect. And at least we can establish that problem. As always, the first step is acknowledging we have one. And I think we haven't even gotten to that point yet. And I think that's what this is really about, is opening people's minds to that. And so I just end on that point in general, that, like, your quote, outstanding. You know, that I've always said this in our work, is that even if I knew for a fact that we wouldn't succeed, I'd still be fighting, because it's just not in me to just sit back and go, oh, well, you know, and I think we all feel that way. And that's such a powerful thing to see. But I do believe that there's a chance here. And I do believe that we see people shifting in the voting or anywhere else. And that's a powerful thing. And so I just want to thank you all for being here and being a part of this alliance. I see a lot of good things coming around this, and I'm excited for where it goes. So anybody else have any final thoughts you want to add before we wrap up here today?
Yeah, I just want to say that, you know, just as they've used technology to try to corral us and control us, and they're using behavioral technology. I mean, even ideas like technocracy have been misused. There are elements of technocracy where the people that designed technocracy back in the 1930s had an idea that it might help humanity, but what the people, and it is people, I would call them the oligarchs or whatever, that are controlling these systems, constantly misuse our ideas and constantly misuse our best intentions against us. And I think that's a big part of the fake binary. So just as behavioral psychology is used to oppress us, we can use behavioral psychology ourselves to move to a better place. All of these, nothing is off the table. All of the ideas that are used to control us can be flipped on their heads, re-examined by us, and used for our benefit. We've just got to stop letting other people tell us how to think and what to think.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to do that is to, as many ways as humanly possible, create the culture that we want to live in, as opposed to the culture that we're forced to react to. And I think that this alliance and a bunch of the other projects that we're all involved in provides a pathway to do that. So very, very pleased to be a part of this.
Outstanding.
Yeah, great first panel. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and everybody who's watching at home. We're really trying to do our best here. We're not just going to be passive and watch things get worse. This is why we're all coming together.
Absolutely. All right, we'll put a pin in for the moment, and you'll expect a lot more coming your way. More panels, more articles, more just interviews, bringing in new people. You have a lot of exciting things coming your way. So thank you all for tuning in. And as always, from my TLAB perspective, question everything, come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.